My brothers abandoned me to foster care when I was 10 years old. Now that I'm 28 with a stable life, they came back begging for forgiveness. But I slammed the door in their face and disappeared without a trace. I'm 28 years old. I work at a coffee shop downtown, and there's something I need to get off my chest because, honestly, what happened a few months ago made me realize that some wounds never fully heal, no matter how hard you try to move forward. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I was 10 years old and my mom died in a car accident, it was one of those things that happens out of nowhere. You know, she went out to get food and a drunk driver ran a red light. I remember I was watching TV when the police came to the door, and my brother Dylan, who was 23 at the time, was the one who answered. I heard the screaming from the living room, that kind of screaming that lets you know something terrible just happened, and when Dylan came back, his face was completely white, like he'd seen a ghost. The days after the funeral were weird, like that feeling of floating around without really knowing what was happening. Dylan and Shane, my other brother who was 19, were always talking to the kitchen with the door closed, and I'd stay in my room trying to process that my mom was never coming back. I thought, obviously, that my brothers would take care of me. I mean, we were family, right? Dylan already had his apartment and a stable job at a tech company, and Shane was in college but lived nearby. It didn't cross my mind, not for a second, that they would leave me alone. But turns out a few days after we buried my mom, Dylan sat me down on the living room couch and said, "Look, Liam, Shane and I have been talking and the situation is complicated. We can't take care of you right now." I remember looking at him without really understanding what he was saying, like my brain wasn't processing those words. I asked him, "So what's going to happen to me?" And he just looked away and said, "Social services is coming. They're going to find you a good temporary home until things settle down." Shane didn't even have the guts to be there when they told me. I found out later that he'd said he couldn't take care of me because he had to focus on school, that he was at a critical moment in his career, basically every excuse in the world to not take responsibility. Dylan at least was present, though that doesn't make what he did okay. Honestly, I remember the social worker arrived like 2 days later, an older woman with a smile that was supposed to make me feel better but only made me feel worse. And she took me with a suitcase that Dylan had packed with my clothes. They didn't even let me keep many of my mom's things, just some photos and a necklace she always wore. The first foster home was horrible. I'm not gonna lie. It was a family that clearly only did it for the government money. Like there were about 4 other kids there and nobody paid you real attention. I stayed there for like 6 months. And during that time, Dylan would call me every 2 weeks or so. Awkward conversations where he'd ask how school was and if I needed anything, but never really listened to my answers. Shane called maybe 3 times in those first 6 months. 3 times. And the calls were basically the same thing. "Hi, Liam. How are you? I gotta go. I'm busy with exams." After a while, Dylan's calls became less frequent, every 3 weeks, then once a month, then basically nothing. By the time I turned 12, it had been like 4 months since I'd heard from either of them. I changed foster homes 2 more times, and each place was more or less the same. People who weren't really interested in you as a person, but in the monthly check. There were moments when I'd sit on my bed, which was never really my bed, but just a bed where I slept temporarily. And I'd wonder what I'd done wrong for my own brothers to abandon me like that. You know, as if I was the problem. School was my escape, I guess. I focused on getting good grades because it was something I could control, something that depended only on me. I had a couple friends, but I never let anyone get too close because what was the point? I was always going to have to move eventually, always going to end up alone again. But when I was 14, something changed. They placed me with the Walker family, and the Walker was different, like she actually cared. She was a woman in her 50s, a widow with no children of her own, and from day one she treated me like I mattered. She'd ask me how my day was and actually wait for me to answer. She'd cook my favorite meals, help me with homework. For the first time since my mom died, I felt like someone saw me as more than a problem, child, or an obligation. I stayed with Mrs. Walker from when I was 14 until I was 18. And honestly, those were the most stable years of my life after losing my mom. She taught me how to cook, took me to her family gatherings, helped me apply to colleges even though I couldn't end up going because I didn't have money for tuition. During those years, Dylan called exactly twice. Once on my 15th birthday, a 3-minute call where he said, "Happy birthday," and hung up because he had a meeting. The second time was Christmas when I was 17, and the call was so awkward, it basically ended after 5 minutes of long silences and generic questions. Shane never called again after I turned 12. Zero contact, as if I'd stopped existing to him. When I turned 18, I technically aged out of the foster care system, and Mrs. the Walker let me stay with her a few more months while I found work and saved for an apartment. I got a job at an electronics store, nothing special, but it paid the bills. I moved into a small studio that was basically a room with a bathroom and a kitchen that was more like a corner with a stove. But it was mine, you know? For the first time in my life, I had a space that nobody was going to take away from me. I worked at that store for almost 2 years, saving every penny I could because I had this idea that I wanted to do something more with my life, though I still didn't know exactly what. When I was 20, I made a decision that basically changed everything. I decided to move to a completely different city, like 6 hours away, without telling anyone except Mrs. Walker. I didn't give Dylan or Shane my new address, didn't tell them I was leaving. I just disappeared. Part of me felt like it was what they'd done to me, and another part just wanted to start over in a place where nobody knew my story. I arrived in this new city with 2 suitcases, some saved money, and zero real plan. I found a shared apartment with 2 other guys who were also trying to figure out what to do with their lives, and I started looking for work. That's when I met Mrs. Collins, the owner of a small coffee shop downtown. I walked in one day looking for free Wi-Fi and cheap coffee, and she was behind the counter with that energy some older people have that makes you feel like they've known you your whole life. We started talking. I told her I was looking for work, and she hired me on the spot. She said she needed someone young with good energy, and that I looked like I needed a place to belong. She wasn't wrong. That job at the coffee shop became more than just a job, like Mrs. Collins taught me everything about coffee, about how to run a small business, about how to deal with difficult customers and create an atmosphere where people wanted to spend time. I became her right hand, and she became something like a mother figure to me, though we never said it out loud. Life was good, honestly. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and for someone who'd spent years without any kind of stability, that was enough. I had my job. I had my roommates, who became real friends over time. I had a routine. And then, when I was 22, I met Kimberly. She started coming to the coffee shop regularly, always ordered an almond milk latte and sat in the corner with her laptop, and after a couple weeks, we started talking. She was pretty, smart, worked in marketing for a small company, and there was something about her that made me want to lower the walls I'd built around myself. We started dating, and things were good from the start, like she was easy to be around, made me laugh, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think that maybe I could have something normal, something good. I told her about my past eventually, about my mom, about my brothers, about the foster care system. It was hard because I'd never talked about it with anyone except Mrs. Walker. But Kimberly listened without judging, and hugged me, and told me she understood why I was so careful about letting people in. She told me she wasn't going to hurt me, that I could trust her, and I believed her. After a year together, we decided to move in together to a bigger apartment, and things seemed to be going in the right direction. You know, like I was finally building the life I'd always wanted. Kimberly's family basically adopted me. Her parents invited me to dinners. Her younger sister treated me like I was her brother. And for the first time since I was 10, I felt like I had something close to a real family. But then, like 6 months ago, everything went to hell. I was at work. It was a normal Tuesday, and my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, and it said, "Hi, Liam. This is Dylan, your brother. I know it's been a long time, but I'd really like to talk to you. Can we meet?" I just stared at the message for what was probably 5 full minutes, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. My first reaction was to block the number and pretend I'd never seen it, but there was something in me that needed to know how the hell he'd gotten my number after all these years. That night when I got home, I asked Kimberly if she knew anything about this, and the way she looked away told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. Turns out, and this completely blew my mind, Kimberly had been in contact with Dylan for months. Months. Apparently, he'd found her on social media, saw pictures of me on her profile, and wrote to her asking about me. And she, without telling me anything, without asking if I was okay with it, decided on her own that it would be a good idea to give him my number and updates about my life. She told me, "I thought you'd be happy to reconnect with your family. I thought I was doing something good. I don't understand why you're so angry." And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, like I'd explicitly told her what my brothers had done to me, how they'd abandoned me when I needed them most, and she thought she had the right to decide I should forgive them, without even consulting me. The fight we had that night was brutal. I yelled at her, which I almost never do, told her she'd betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, that she had no right to make that decision for me. She cried and said she was just trying to help, that family is important, that everyone deserves a second chance. And I told her, "You know what? You have no idea what it's like to have your family abandon you when you're 10 years old. You have no idea what it's like to spend years in temporary homes wondering what you did wrong for nobody to want you." Dylan had 18 years to contact me, 8 years to apologize or at least try to be part of my life, and he didn't. Shane didn't either. And now that it apparently suits them to reconnect, I'm supposed to be happy? I told her I needed space and went out to walk for hours, basically until my feet hurt so bad I had to come back. During the next few days, things between Kimberly and me were tense, like we lived together but barely spoke to each other. Dylan kept sending me messages. Now that he had my number, he wasn't going to give up easily, apparently. The messages were all variations of the same thing. "I know we made a mistake. We want to make it up to you. Shane wants to talk to you too. Please give us a chance." Each message made me feel worse. Like all the progress I'd made over these years to be okay was being dismantled piece by piece. A week after the initial fight with Kimberly, I told her I couldn't continue the relationship. It wasn't just what she'd done, but the fact that she didn't understand why it was wrong. She kept insisting she'd acted with good intentions and that I was being too harsh. We broke up, and I stayed in the apartment while she went to her parents' house. I thought that would be the end of the drama, but of course it wasn't. Kimberly's parents, who I thought loved and respected me, showed up at the coffee shop a few days later. Mrs. Collins warned me there were people asking for me, and when I came out of the storage room, there they were, her mom with her arms crossed and her dad with that disappointed face that parents know how to do so well. They told me we needed to talk, that I'd treated their daughter horribly, that she was just trying to help me reconnect with my family, and I'd overreacted. I explained, as calmly as I could considering I was at my workplace, that what Kimberly had done was a violation of my trust and boundaries, that she knew exactly why I didn't want contact with my brothers and did it anyway. Her father told me something that still bothers me when I think about it. He said, "The problem with you, Liam, is that you never learned what family means because you grew up without one. And that's not your fault, but you can't keep using your past as an excuse to push away people who love you." And I just stood there, in the middle of the coffee shop where I worked, with other customers, watching this awkward scene, feeling like I was 10 years old again, and someone was telling me the problem was me, that I was the one who was broken, the one who didn't know how to function in the normal world. Mrs. Collins came out from behind the counter and asked them politely but firmly to leave, that this wasn't the time or place, and they finally left, but not without saying I was making a big mistake. And then, because apparently the universe decided I hadn't had enough drama, Dylan showed up at my apartment. I don't even know how he got the address, probably from Kimberly before we broke up. He rang the bell on a Saturday morning, and when I opened the door, there he was, my older brother who I hadn't seen in person in almost 8 years. He looked older, obviously. He was like 31 at that point, some gray hairs showing in his beard, and this expression on his face like he expected me to hug him or something. I just stood there at the door, blocking the entrance, and asked him what he wanted. He tried to smile and said, "Can we talk? I've come from far away just to see you." And I told him, "I didn't ask you to come. In fact, I've been actively ignoring you. So, no, we can't talk." He tried to explain, said that he and Shane had felt terrible all these years, that not a day went by without them regretting letting me go into the system. that they were young and stupid and didn't know how to handle the situation. I told him, "You were 23 and 19. You weren't kids. You were old enough to make decisions, and you made the decision to abandon me. And now that you have your lives established and probably feel guilty, I'm supposed to forgive you and act like those 8 years didn't happen?" He asked if we could at least get coffee, talk things through, and I closed the door in his face, literally. I could hear him on the other side saying my name, knocking softly. But eventually, he left. During the following weeks, the messages continued. Now from both of them, Dylan and Shane. Shane sent me a long message apologizing, saying he'd been a coward, that he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but at least wanted me to know he was sorry. And part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe they really meant what they were saying. But the other part, the part that had spent years learning not to depend on anyone, knew that even if their apologies were sincere, that didn't change the damage they'd done. I couldn't give me those years back. Couldn't erase the nights I spent wondering why I wasn't enough for them to stay. I couldn't change the fact that I learned to survive without them, and now I didn't need them. I decided to move again, this time to an apartment in a different part of the city, without telling anyone except Mrs. Walker and my boss at the coffee shop. I changed my phone number too, because clearly keeping the same one was only going to mean Dylan and Shane would keep having access to me. It was drastic, I know, but I needed to regain that feeling of control over my life. I needed firm boundaries that nobody could cross without my permission. The move was quick. I basically packed my things in a weekend and left, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe again. A few weeks after the move, something unexpected but good happened. I was at the coffee shop and Anthony walked in, a guy I'd known in one of my foster homes when I was like 15. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we recognized each other immediately, and we ended up talking for hours after my shift ended. He'd also aged out of the system, had also struggled with his own demons, and there was something comforting about talking to someone who really understood what it was like to grow up without a safety net. We became friends again, or maybe friends for the first time, really, since in the foster care system it's hard to form real connections when everyone's dealing with their own trauma. Anthony told me he'd cut contact with his biological family too, that sometimes the best decision you can make is to walk away from people who hurt you, regardless of whether they share your blood or not. He told me something that stuck with me. He said, "People are going to tell you that family is everything, that you have to forgive because they're your blood. But the truth is, nobody but you knows what you lived through. Nobody else has to carry that weight. And if you need distance to be, okay, then take that distance without feeling guilty." And he was right. Like I'd been feeling guilty for months about not wanting to reconnect with Dylan and Shane, as if I was the bad guy in the story. But talking to Anthony made me realize I don't have to justify my boundaries to anyone. Now, at 28, I can say I'm okay. Not perfectly, but okay. I'm still working at the coffee shop, Mrs. Collins is teaching me more about the business side because she says someday I'm going to have my own place, and honestly, that's my goal now, save enough to open my own small coffee shop. I have a group of friends who are more family to me than my biological brothers ever were. I have an apartment that's mine and where nobody shows up without an invitation. I have a life I built myself without anyone's help. Is it the perfect life? No. Are there still days where I wonder what would have happened if Dylan and Shane had loved me enough to stay with me? Sure. But those days are getting less frequent. Last week, Anthony and I were having beers at my apartment, and he asked me if I ever thought about giving my brothers a chance. I told him I honestly didn't know. That maybe at some point in the future when I've processed everything better, or maybe never. And both options were fine. He told me, "You know what's important? You have options now. You're not that 10-year-old kid with no control over anything." And he's right. I took control of my life the only way I knew how, by walking away from what hurt me, building something new from scratch. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Mrs. Collins tells me often that I'm stronger than I think, and I guess I'm starting to believe her. Like I survived things that could have destroyed another person, and here I am, still standing, still moving forward. And that's enough for now.